2 Samuel chapter 15. After these events, Absalom prepared chariots, horses, and 50 men to run before him. Absalom would rise early and stand beside the road leading to the city gate. Whenever someone had a dispute to bring before the king for judgment, Absalom would call out to him and say, "What city are you from?" If he replied, "Your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel," Absalom would respond, "Look, your claims are valid and proper, but there is no representative of the king to listen to you." Then Absalom would add, "If only someone would appoint me judge in the land. Then anyone with a grievance or complaint could come to me, and I would ensure justice for them." Whenever someone approached to bow down before him, Absalom would extend his hand, take hold of him, and kiss him. Absalom acted in this way toward all the Israelites who came to the king for judgment. So he stole the hearts of the men of Israel. At the end of 40 years, Absalom said to the king, "Please let me go to Hebron and fulfill a vow I made to the Lord. For while I lived in Geshur in Aram, your servant made this vow, if the Lord ever brings me back to Jerusalem, I will worship the Lord in Hebron." "Go in peace," the king replied. So Absalom got up and went to Hebron. Then Absalom sent secret messengers throughout the tribes of Israel, saying, "When you hear the sound of the trumpet, you are to say, 'Absalom reigns in Hebron.'" With Absalom went 200 men from Jerusalem who had been invited and went along innocently, not knowing anything. While Absalom was offering the sacrifices, he sent for Ahithophel the Gilonite, David's counselor, to come from his city Giloh. So the conspiracy gained strength, and Absalom's following kept increasing. A messenger came to David, reporting, "The hearts of the men of Israel have gone over to Absalom." David said to all his servants with him in Jerusalem, "Get up! We have to flee, or we will not escape from Absalom. Leave quickly, or he will soon overtake us, heap disaster upon us, and strike the city with the edge of the sword." The king's servants replied, "Whatever our lord the king decides, we are your servants." So the king and his entire household set out on foot, but he left 10 concubines to take care of the palace. The king set out with all the people on foot, and they stopped at the last house. That belonged to the king's attendants, and all his Cherethites and Pelethites and all the Gittites, 600 men who had followed him from Gath, went on ahead of the king. The king said to Ittai the Gittite, "Why should you come with us? Go back and stay with King Absalom. You are a foreigner and even an exile from your homeland. You came only yesterday, and should I make you wander around with us today while I go wherever I can? Go back and take your brothers with you. May the Lord show you kindness and faithfulness." But Ittai answered the king, "As surely as the Lord lives and as my lord the king lives, wherever my lord the king may be, whether it means life or death, there your servant will be." David said to Ittai, "Go ahead, march on." So Ittai the Gittite marched on with all his men and the families that were with him. The whole countryside wept aloud as all the people passed by. The king crossed the Kidron Valley, and all the people moved on toward the wilderness. Zadok was there too, and all the Levites with him were carrying the Ark of the Covenant of God. They set down the Ark of God, and Abiathar offered sacrifices until all the people had finished leaving the city. Then the king said to Zadok, "Take the Ark of God back to the city. If I find favor in the Lord's eyes, he will bring me back and let me see both it and his dwelling place again. But if he says, 'I am not pleased with you,' then I am ready. Let him do to me whatever seems good to him." The king also said to Zadok the priest, "Do you understand? Go back to the city with my blessing. Take your son Ahimaaz with you, and also Abiathar's son Jonathan. You and Abiathar return with your 2 sons. I will wait at the fords in the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me." So Zadok and Abiathar took the Ark of God back to Jerusalem and stayed there. But David continued up the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. His head was covered, and he was barefoot. All the people with him covered their heads too and were weeping as they went up. Now David had been told, "Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom." So David prayed, "Lord, turn Ahithophel's counsel into foolishness." When David arrived at the summit, where people used to worship God, Hushai the Arkite was there to meet him, his robe torn and dust on his head. David said to him, "If you go with me, you will be a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, 'Your Majesty, I will be your servant. I was your father's servant in the past, but now I will be your servant,' then you can help me by frustrating Ahithophel's advice. Won't the priests Zadok and Abiathar be there with you? Tell them anything you hear in the king's palace. Their 2 sons, Ahimaaz son of Zadok and Jonathan son of Abiathar, are there with them. Send them to me with anything you hear." So Hushai, David's confidant, arrived at Jerusalem as Absalom was entering the city.